from the age 8, there was no question as to what I was going to become. We've been in my family violin makers from father to son for about 200 years.
A violin is considered a work of art by most serious musicians. For listeners, the sound this fragile instrument creates is almost mystical. If a stringed instrument is damaged through neglect, accident, or simply by age, it takes the patience and precision of a surgeon to mend it. For Jacques Francais, restoring damaged instruments to their former acoustic and visual beauty is a labor of love as well as a business. The owner of the nation's most important repair shop for musical strings, he is also a collector of them. Jacques Francais, together with René Morel, the master craftsman who heads his staff, are known as the men on whom the world's most demanding musicians rely to ensure their fullest musical expression. I'm Barbara Lee Diamonstein for Handmade in America.
I believe that all players are very involved with their instruments. A string player is even more so because he has more physical contact. It's the only instrument where the right hand and the left hand are not doing the same thing. And the potential for modeling and creating colors in the sound are much more developed on the violin than on any other instrument.
What is it about the restoration of stringed instruments that first attracted you and that continues to sustain your interest?
Well, it's an enormous satisfaction to discover an instrument in a terrible state of restoration or of repair, and who has been mistreated over the years by poor restoration, poor judgment in the restoration, mistreated by the player, and to completely rehabilitate the instrument to its former beauty, both for physical look and for sound.
Let's talk about the history of instrument making. When and where did it all begin?
The first violin that we know came, I believe, out of Italy in the 16th century. And most likely, the first date we have is probably by a maker named Andreas Amati, which is the founder of the Cremoni school.
The names that are most familiar to most of us are Stradivarius and Guarneri. Who were they, and when did they work, and where did they work?
They both were Cremoni's maker. They both worked in the beginning of the 18th century, Stradivarius in the later part of the 16th, 17th century. And they have both become famous during their lifetime, especially Stradivarius, not so much Guarnerius. Guarnerius became famous later, more like in the 19th century, when a very famous and splashing violinist by the name of Niccolò Paganini started to play on a Guarnerius del Gesù.
Over how long a period were violins produced in their workshops?
It depends on the lifetime of each maker, naturally, which varies a great deal. For example, Stradivarius died at the age of 93. which was rather late.
Is there any evidence to how many violins he produced during that period of time?
It's very hard to tell. There are, if we study the dictionary on Stradivarius, or the compilation of the violins made by Stradivarius, it turns out that we have about 800 violins being made.
How many of them still exist?
Well, that's what's left. We must have had a much larger production than that, because a lot of them have disappeared in fire, in revolution.
How is it possible for an instrument that is so old to produce such remarkable, such perfect sound?
Now you're asking the key question. The sound of the Italian school of the 18th century is certainly recognized as being the most important and the most interesting, the most beautiful. That's why all the great soloists play either a Stradivarius or a Guarnerius on the stage.
Why can't we reproduce that same sound?
Well, you're absolutely correct. We can duplicate a Stradivarius to a tenth of a millimeter. We can choose very old pieces of wood. We can do everything that those makers did, exactly the way they did it, with the same tools, with the same method. The only thing we cannot duplicate is the filler that goes in the wood. This has been oxidized over the years, and scientists and chemists have been trying to find out the secret of the Italian varnish of the 18th century.
The filler is the varnish.
No, the filler is the product or the coat of liquid which is applied to the violin before varnishing. That sinks into the grain of the wood and goes through the wood. And that's what we don't know. I believe it must have been a very simple product that was bought at the corner drugstore. This disappeared at the end of the 19th century, and most likely because the modern technology came with quick drying varnish, and I assume that filler took months to dry.
Do you use that same procedure when you restore instruments here?
We can't really, because we don't have the secret. We would love to have the secret.
Are you working on that secret?
Of course, everybody's dying and trying all his lifetime to find the secret. Maybe sometime, someday.
What today is so valued about a Stradivarius or a Guarneri as an instrument? Is it its age? Is it its tone? Is it its color?
The main reason why Stradivarius are so much in demand is because they are extraordinarily good sounding instrument and being sought for by all the artists. Mm-hmm. The aesthetic aspect of a violin is something somewhat different. But basically, I think the importance of a Stradivarius comes from the way it sounds.
Tell us about René Morel for a moment. He's the vice president of your company and the master of the repair shop. How did the collaboration between the two of you first begin?
Well, René was brought up like me in France. He followed the same school as I did.
Mirecourt?
He was born in Mirecourt and trained in Mirecourt, spent all his youth in Mirecourt. And he came to this country and first worked in Chicago for a short time. And after that, he went to work with one of the most important violin maker and restorer of all time, whose name was Fernando Sacconi. He was an Italian who was trained in Cremona and in Berlin, and was a genius as developing new technique and new method of restoration. And René was fortunate enough to work with him for 10, 15 years.
Was this at the Wurlitzer shop?
At the Wurlitzer shop. He joined forces with me and developed his own school. He is today another Sacconi. The kids come from all the school to apply here in order to work under his guidance and learn from him, not only what he has learned from Sacconi, but the technique that he has developed on his own. What he knows about violin, about sounds, about the interplay of all the components of a violin is quite exceptional. I don't know any other violin maker who can explain, analyze, and describe what a violin needs and how to go about it.
I like to do something, and if you play the same thing again, do you mind?
Please, you're the master.
Okay. I want to round the E string a little bit and give you more punch on the G. Yet, if you feel it's a little more difficult to play, then you let me know. Otherwise, we can always go back where we are.
All right.
Okay. You afraid? No.
No, not when you touch it, René.
Okay. The instrument will become just a tiny bit stiffer, probably, under the bow, more brilliant in sound, but
not harder to play?
You may have more on the G. I let you tune up, you do that much better than I can. That's the instrument I play the best.
What do you think?
Well,
the G string does have more sonority.
More, okay.
Why don't you describe what a typical day is like in the studio and workshops of Jacques Francais? How does the shop operate?
The shop operates strictly under the guidance of Mr. Morel. He will take the repairs, judge what has to be done, takes it to the shop, and supervise the work and distribute the work to whoever is able to do that particular work. When it's an instrument that I own, we discuss together what kind of repair the instrument will take and what should be done, how far we should get involved with the repair or not. Okay, this is a very fine Pietro Guarnerius of Venice violin, which I'm afraid needs a big repair. Not even a repair, I mean a restoration. Now that you have the violin open, we can see better. The first thing I see from the outside is that the arching is all warped. There's a big hole here and a big hole there. And I suppose it will have to be completely reshaped.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, you see, that was already attempted before somewhere else. So we have to undo what was done. On the other hand, this problem with that arching there, no matter what you do, if you don't restore that arching correctly, you will have the neck moving up and down.
During the change of seasons.
I suggest then one will...
How long does it take to restore a violin to its full potential? What's the process like?
Well, naturally it depends of how much the restoration the violin needs. I would say a violin which is in terrible state will probably take 2 years to restore.
Why does it take so long?
Because, for example, when you reshape an arching, you have to leave it in the mold for about 2-3 months so that the shape will hold.
What you have to assure yourself that the top is fastened very securely.
Put a couple of clamps down here.
Yeah, that's it. And here, do you have a block for this? Okay. Crack, okay? Mm-hmm. And I think you're all set to go. The guys with your belly or your chest?
No, this one's nice and sharp. It's working pretty well.
Yeah. Restoration is a little more than just one profession. As we call restoration, we mean by the word that we want to put back the original of that instrument, whatever we work on, as the maker himself built it or constructed. Now, the restorer must be able to see first what is the maker sense of craft. Then next, the restorer is supposed to be able to put it back as that maker originally desired. And it sounds like I'm lecturing, but it's the only way I can explain what I'm doing there. See, the difference between varnish retouching and painting is that varnish has to remain transparent.
I assume that there are some varieties of wood that are preferred for use in making or restoring violins. What kind of wood do you use, and why do you select one kind rather than another?
The wood we have today is wood that has been in the family for years, thank God for that. My grandfather kept on buying woods over the years for their grandchildren.
Really?
It happens to be me today. And that's why I'm very fortunate to have a large selection of wood which has been chosen in the family for the last 100 years. We actually do buy wood that we're not going to use for the next 10, 20 years, even today.
It seems to me that there is a resurgence of interest in the craft of making and restoring musical instruments right in this country. Is that accurate, and how do you explain this increased renaissance?
Well, if you remember, 10, 15 years ago, the kids who were 18 to 25 started this return to the commune, this desire to create with their hand, the desire to grow things on their own. And out of this interest into artisanal and working with your hand, some of those kids decided to make violins or to learn to make violins. And since there was a great need for new instruments, there are not enough 18, 19, and even 20th century instruments in existence to satisfy the needs of the world. There was a demand for new instruments. So that there is today a renaissance of violin making, which is marvelous because you have all kinds of young makers. For example, in our shop we have 4 makers which are very talented and very gifted and very dedicated and very anxious to learn. It's the first group of really American makers born in this country.
First you're going to remove this, and that's very simple. You do it in that fashion, yes? Be very careful that you take the chips in order not to crack the side of the ribs, yes?
Right.
Don't take...
You've said that in traveling the world in search of violins, the trick is not to sell them, but to find them. How do you go about tracking down the ones that are the rarest and the most precious? Can you tell us some of your secrets?
It's not a secret. Most of them have gone through my hands or the one of my families in the past. And violin makers and theirs keep a special relationship with their customers and their violins.
And their customers' families.
Exactly. And we visit each other, we talk to each other, and I usually know where most of my fiddles are, the one I've sold through my life, and they sooner or later come back to me. I have never discovered a Stradivarius that was not known yet.
Not one?
Not one. Nor did my father, and he's 80 years of age, and nor did my grandfather, who died at 83.
What would you estimate, if one can do that, is the approximate value of a rare instrument nowadays?
It varies greatly. If you are talking about 18th century violin, and if you're talking about Italian violin, They vary anywhere between $20,000 and $500,000.
For one violin.
One Stradivarius was sold recently for more than $1 million. It was a very special Stradivarius.
What made it so rare?
Well, it was regarded as the #2 most important Stradivarius violin, and it was reputedly sold for over $1 million.
How important to the restoration process is contact with the artists themselves?
Every violin has to be adjusted for each player. But when you restore a violin for sound reason, like changing a bass bar or changing the angle of the neck, you don't really take into account the person who is going to play it. Once it's done, then you adjust the violin for that person.
I'm still fascinated by the idea that someone flies from Europe or from Louisiana to come to one shop, however special it is. It must be very special. What makes this shop unique?
I think that we offer excellence of service, and we have, I think, acquired great knowledge over the years. Not only knowledge that we have inherited, but knowledge that we have developed on our own. And I think people come to us because they feel secure in coming to our shop, both for their repairs and for their appraisal.
Renee, I brought this in so you could take a look at it because I haven't been happy with the way it's been sounding this last few weeks.
Yes. How long did it start it? A few weeks?
Well, yeah, about 4 weeks ago. And then, I don't know, it sounded a little bit hollow to me and not incisive as I'd like it to be. It's not so much the ring I like, but there's more than the ring. It sounds like you got a pedal down on the piano, you know, where things cloud over.
Let me hear the instrument, please. Yeah. It's a little dull on the bass side, yeah, mostly. That's where your problem? A little bit.
Yeah, that's...
Okay. Now, like this will be, it's more in a normal high. Now,
in the studio and workshops of Jacques Francais, we've witnessed the remarkable restoration and eventual transformation of wood and string into objects of visual excellence and instruments of musical splendor. I'm Barbara Lee Diamonstein for Handmade in America.